speakers and participants joining us from Africa. A very good morning to you. My name is Winnie from the Africa, Europe, Middle East, and Central and South Asia Department of SPF, and I will be your MC for our Festival Africa edition webinar today on doing business in Africa. Festival is an initiative under the Global Connected SPF program aimed at helping Singapore companies learn more about the opportunities and business environments in overseas markets, land business deals, investment projects, and eventually localize in their markets of interest with a well-grounded and sustainable business presence for long-term growth. Before we begin, please allow me to acknowledge our partners and supporting organizations, Enterprise Singapore, Canberra, the NTU SPF Center for African Studies, and the African Diplomatic Missions of Angola, Egypt, Nigeria, Rwanda, and South Africa in Singapore. Our webinar today would not be possible without their strong and invaluable support. Now, just a quick reminder on some courtesy points and house rules. So please note that we have the microphones on mute so that the webinar will not be disrupted. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can type them into the Q&A box in Zoom throughout the duration of the webinar. We will try our best to have your questions answered during the panel and Q&A segments. So we also seek your understanding and help in respecting our speakers and their generosity in sharing with you their insights. So our webinar today is entitled Business in Africa, sometimes challenging, always promising, and we have a fantastic lineup of experts who have extensive knowledge and experience on doing business in Africa. So for today's program, we will start off with a welcome address by Mr. Ranveer S. Chauhan, Chairman of the SPF Africa Business Group. We then have the honor of having His Excellency Jean de Dieu Wihang Ganye, High Commissioner of the Republic of Uganda and Dean of African Diplomatic Missions in Singapore, to open our webinar with his opening remarks. Mr. Amit Jain, Director of the NTU SPF Center for African Studies, will give his presentation and then continue and moderate our webinar's roundtable panel discussion with our esteemed panel of business leaders comprising Mr. Ranveer Chauhan, Chairman of SPF's Africa Business Group and also Director of Aquaba Ventures, Ms. Neo Poling, Executive Director for Africa, Russia, Latin America, and Europe at Singapore Cooperation Enterprise, Mr. George Chan, Co-founder and CEO of Pixis, a fintech company developing digital platforms to facilitate payments and cross-border trade in and out of Africa, and Mr. Selina Omadia, Committee Member of Connect Africa and Senior Advisor of Afria Advisory and Investments. So before we go into our program proper, just a quick introduction to Global Connected SPF. So as briefly mentioned earlier, Global Connected SPF is an initiative aimed at assisting Singapore companies looking to internationalize and deepen their presence in overseas markets. So under Global Connected SPF, Singapore companies can tap on SPF for their internationalization journey through our three pillars of learn, land, and localize. Under learn, Singapore companies can learn about markets and overseas business opportunities. We do this by, for example, sharing useful resources such as curated market information, free trade agreement advisory, structured training through workshops, and not to mention webinars such as the one you are attending today. We also organize business missions and learning journeys where Singapore companies can experience and appreciate the local business and operating environments of overseas markets. Singapore companies can also tap on Global Connect at SPF to land in overseas markets with business deals and investment projects through our platforms for B2B matching, market advisors, and our Singapore Enterprise Centers currently operating in Jakarta, Indonesia, Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, and Bangkok, Thailand. So Global Connect at SPF also seeks to help more Singapore companies to localize by deepening their presence in markets, leveraging trusted relationships abroad, and achieving sustainable long-term growth in their markets of interest. So right now we have an audience poll. So if you're interested to get in touch with us on Africa and other various assistance available, please indicate yes to the questions in the poll. You can also contact us via Global Connect at SPF's email shown on the slide. So now, thank you a lot for your patience. Without further ado, please allow me to invite Mr. Ranveer S. Chauhan, Chairman of the SPF Africa Business Group, to kick off our program for today. with his welcome address. This time, please.
Winning, thank you. Your Excellency, Jean de Dieu Uhianganye, High Commissioner of the Republic of Rwanda and Dean of African Diplomatic Missions in Singapore. Distinguished speakers and panelists, ladies and gentlemen, Africa friends and Africa enthusiasts, a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. On behalf of Singapore Business Federation, I welcome you to this webinar on business in Africa, sometimes challenging, always promising. This webinar is the first of 6 webinars organized under the Africa edition of SBF's FYIstival held in 2022. We are grateful to our partners, Enterprise Singapore and Convera, and supporting organizations, the African Diplomatic Missions in Singapore, Embassy of the Republic of Angola, Embassy of the Arab Republic of Egypt, High Commission of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, High Commission of the Republic of Rwanda, and High Commission of the Republic of South Africa, and surely NTU SBF Center for African Studies for making today's webinar possible. Our thanks go especially to the High Commissioner of the Republic of Rwanda and Dean of African Diplomatic Missions in Singapore, His Excellency Jean de Dieu Uhianganye, for accepting our invitation to open our webinar today, and for strong and unwavering support of the African Diplomatic Missions in Singapore rendered to SBF. Africa is the world's next big growth market. Its population is young, fast-growing, and increasingly urbanized. While rapid technology adoption makes the continent a fertile area for innovation, however, its business environment often remains poorly understood while suffering heightened negative publicity and perceptions of complexity, conflict, and corruption. Since its founding years, SBF has sought to help pry open the perceptions of Singapore businesses by leading business missions and overseas market workshops to different regions of Africa, as well as actively promoting Africa as a destination for Singapore businesses to explore emerging opportunities through market seminars, forums, and roundtable dialogues. To further facilitate the exchanges between the Singapore business community and their counterparts from the African region, SBF also formed the Africa Business Group in 2010. SBF also partnered with NTU in 2014 to establish the NTU SBF Center for African Studies, a practice-oriented think tank to conduct research, foster networks, and build capacity for doing businesses in Africa. To further support our business community's understanding and capabilities to explore the growth markets in Africa. Today's webinar is aimed at providing our Singapore business community with a more grounded perspective of the emerging trends in Africa and the growth opportunities arising from these trends, while addressing some of the challenges and risks associated with doing business in Africa, including some of the newer challenges which have emerged in the recent years. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers today. Their experience across multiple growth sectors, including both novel and more traditional business sectors, and across different regions of Africa that are culturally different. So without further ado, allow me to invite His Excellency Jean de Dieu to open our webinar. I wish you an insightful and fruitful webinar ahead. Excellency.
Your Excellencies, Mr. Lanvir Chauhan, Chairman of African Business Group, the Singapore Business Federation, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the African Group in Singapore, it is my great honor to be able to be part of this event And thank you very much for the Singapore Business Federation and its partners for inviting us, for partnering with us to this webinar entitled Business in Africa, sometimes challenging, but we have to stress it, always promising. On a real note, in order to help companies to keep abreast of the opportunities in overseas market amid the uncertainties, and as part of its Global Connect SBF program, SBF launched FYIstival SBF Fast Interactive Digital Space, which integrates multiple platforms of information and interaction through online webinars, business matching sessions, and virtual chat rooms. So once again, we thank SBF. SBF chose Africa as the main focal point for FYI Festival, and we can only be delighted. With this in mind, I would like to take you to the promising future. The promising future continent that we call Africa, the motherland. On the surface, we are blessed with beautiful wildlife, huge fauna and flora, as well as plenty of natural resources such as gold, diamond, oil, and etc., making the list endless. Africa's population is estimated to reach 1.7 billion mark by 2030, making it the fastest urbanizing region in the world. The continent has a large youth demographic, and they are expected to become the next rising middle class with high purchasing power and market potential. The African market is open for investment in all sectors, with advantages derived from its privileged geographical location, connectivity between countries like sea, rail, road, and growing telecommunication services. And with African Continental Free Trade Agreement currently operational, the continent slightly less than 1.3 billion people, the largest single market in the world, is poised for good business. The economic opportunities are growing as the continent is opening up to digitalization and regional integration. On the other end, the Singapore's strong infrastructure, coupled with its favorable regulatory and legal framework, also make it ideal for African companies to access the Asian market, but also for Asian companies to use Singapore to access the African market. Singapore has a stable and productive business environment, strong support infrastructure, and an ecosystem of foreign and domestic companies. We have currently more than 200 companies from Singapore operating in Africa. Africa continues to play an important global role. Rwanda recently hosted the Commonwealth Head of Government meeting in Kigali in June, and the Prime Minister of Singapore announced that Singapore will have a package for African officials under the Singapore Cooperation Program to be increased more. The announcement was made in Rwanda during that visit. In Egypt, this year, Egypt will be hosting the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP27, this November. By hosting these important international events, Africa showcases its global leadership potential and sends a strong signal that it definitely is open for business. Once again, thank you to everyone, especially the Singapore Business Federation, for this webinar and many more to come, as we are certain that this festival started will continue to play an important role as an integrated platform for Singapore businesses to interact with fellow businesses from various parts of the world. Thank you so much for everyone who attended, and I wish you a good conference and good discussions.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for opening our webinar. May I now invite Mr. Amit Jain, Director of the NTU SBF Center for African Studies, to give his presentation, and then after to moderate our roundtable for today with our business leaders from Singapore and Africa on finding success in Africa. Mr. Jain, please.
Thank you very much, Wing. Thank you, Your Excellency, Ranveer, for that kind introduction. I will share my screen. Right. Thank you so much, everyone, for that kind introduction, Your Excellency. This is a pleasure to be here. The title of my presentation today is Africa on the Move, a market of hope and opportunity. I've decided to remove the word risk that I think is unfairly attached to anything that has to do with Africa. And here's the reason why. Risk is something that is inherent, is an endeavor undertaken with the view of making returns. It doesn't matter whether you are setting up a coffee chain in Singapore or in Kigali. And yet, when investors walk into the office of an investment banker in Shenton Way and make a pitch for doing business that has that six-lettered word Africa, they get shown the door more often than not. That is such a shame. I'm guessing this is what comes to your mind when in the mind of a financier when he thinks of Africa. Photos and stories of famine, skinny, bony children taken by Western news agencies and TV networks have been framed into our mind for decades. Conflict, that Africans are perpetually at war with each other. The more tribal in nature, the more attention it tends to get. Poverty, that Africa is an economic basket case where people live hand to mouth and depend mostly on handouts and international aid. And of course, disease. This is what gets reported in the international press, that Africa is a land of deadly diseases like yellow fever, malaria, typhoid, and Ebola. I wrote this piece for the Cape Times last year explaining why that prejudice still lingers. But that image of Africa is somewhat outdated. Africa is on the move. It is now more of a market of hope and opportunity than disease and despair. Let me put up some facts that you probably do not know about Africa. First, Africa is bigger than you think it is. As a matter of fact, it is larger than the United States, China, India, and Europe put together. A flight from Cairo to Johannesburg is longer than Singapore to Japan. A flight from Accra to Nairobi is about the same as from Singapore to New Delhi. And so the potential size of the African economy is $3.4 trillion. That's provided the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is fully implemented. The more realistic figure that gets bandied about is about $2.7 trillion. But that too is significant. I mean, if you look at the size, it's roughly the same size of the economy as India's. The population of China is almost equal to that of the population of Africa is almost equal to China. Yeah, this you probably know. But what you may not know is that it is concentrated in just 4 countries: Nigeria, Egypt, DR Congo, and Ethiopia. Africa is full of youthful energy. The median age is 20. 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. 15 of the fastest growing cities in the world are in Africa. And if I can plug in a little bit of a trivia here, Dar es Salaam in Tanzania is the fastest growing city in the world today. 300 million Africans are classified as middle class. That's more than what India can claim. So Africa is rich in natural resources. We all know that. 10% of the world's oil, 40% of its gold, 80% of its most valuable minerals are locked inside the soil of Africa. Africa is among the fastest adopter of technology. Mobile phone penetration rate is more than 50%. The number of mobile handsets in use has doubled since 2015. More than 300 million people access the internet through their smartphones in Africa. But what if I told you that there are more than 400 companies whose annual revenue is more than $1 billion annual revenue, 39 whose annual revenue is more than $3 billion. The return on capital in Africa on average is twice the rest of the world. African banks are twice more profitable as those in the developed world. Just 10 years after the end of genocide, for example, Rwanda managed to accumulate $739 million from absolutely nothing. African governments have the lowest default rate in the world. Collectively, they hold a corpus of $300 billion in pension funds. Now, that is a lot of money and wealth to look at. Foreign investors have consistently made more on their investments in Africa than almost any other part of the world. And yet, investing in Africa is somehow considered riskier than investing in Greece. The absurdity of this was not lost on me when I was preparing for this presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa should be seen more as a market of hope and opportunity, not despair and despondency. And here's why. First, the continent's booming population. It is hard to believe, but at the turn of the last century, the entire population of the entire continent was only 140 million people. Today, it has exploded to 1 billion. That makes Africa an attractive consumer market. That's not all. It is also a youthful marketplace. I mentioned earlier that the median age of an African is 20 years. What I didn't tell you is that more children born here now have the chance to grow into healthy adults than they ever did. So if your business is dependent on demand of a growing and young population, then Africa is the place to be. Second, urbanization. Africa is urbanizing quickly, very quickly. By 2030, there will be 89 cities with a population of more than 1 million people. By 2035, Africa will have the world's largest urban population and a workforce larger than that of India's or China. That will create a surge in consumer demand for everything from noodles to toothpaste to cars and air conditioners. Cities account for 80% of consumers with a disposable income to acquire such things. McKinsey predicts that spending on personal consumption alone could hit $2.1 trillion by 2025. Even if you were to give that estimate a reasonable margin of error, that would still be pretty impressive. Global brands were a rarity in Africa 20 years ago. Not any longer, not even in the upscale neighborhoods at that time. It was only a handful of politicians and their henchmen who used to flaunt expensive suits. But that has changed now. Young African men can now be seen dressed in fine Armani suits, and women cannot be seen in public holding anything less than an LV bag. The third big factor that makes Africa attractive for investments is the progress it is making on becoming a single market. The African Continental Free Trade Area is perhaps most ambitious economic integration program ever undertaken. If successful, it will lift 30 million Africans out of poverty, expand the size of the economy to 3.4 trillion, bring down the cost of cross-border trade by 2 to 10%, and increase intra-African trade by 52%. Increase manufacturing exports by 560 billion, and I can go on. Natural resources. There are not that many places in the world that are as abundant in oil and gas, copper, gold, zinc, tin, magnesium, bauxite, and cobalt as Africa. The continent is sitting on more than $82 trillion worth of discovered natural resources with the potential to contribute 30 billion in a year to government revenues over the next 20 years. With fossil fuels still taking up 84% of the world's energy mix, and the transition With fossil fuels taking up 84% of the world's energy mix and the transition to clean energy still in its infancy, it is clear that our dependence on African oil, gas, and mineral resources is not likely to diminish anytime soon. If anything, the recent spike in food and fuel prices has only brought to attention our vulnerability to exogenous shocks. This would make Africa an even more attractive place for the world's mining and oil companies to do business. Let us take natural gas, for example. It is not only fossil fuel that powers some power plants, but also it's a key ingredient that goes into the making of fertilizers. But for years, new gas projects across Africa have suffered setbacks because Western banks have been unwilling to fund new hydrocarbon projects. Now, suddenly, the tables have turned. Africa has 7.5% of the world's proven natural gas reserves. As gas supplies from Russia become erratic, Europe is scrambling to Africa for supplies. New pipelines are being laid in haste to connect Nigerian oil fields to Europe, even as West Africa itself is in need of that gas. The G7 is all for new gas and oil and gas investments after committing to suspending it at the COP26 last year. Having said that, investors in the extractive sector would need to be cautious on how they approach these opportunities. Competition for Africa's natural resources will come from an increasingly diverse set of countries, each wanting to secure its own supplies. African governments now understand that their reliance on commodities makes their economies vulnerable to cycles of booms and bust. They would want investors to add value and not just ship away their raw materials on the cheap. There is likely to be, therefore, a greater play in negotiations. Fifth and final, Africa is an attractive place of investments because of infrastructure, or rather the lack of it. Despite stellar improvements in recent years, Africa still lags behind the rest of the world when it comes to hard infrastructure. This includes roads, rail, power plants, and ports. The African Development Bank estimates the infrastructure gap in Africa to be somewhere between $130 to $170 billion. It was required anything between $68 billion to $108 billion in financing to bridge the infrastructure deficit. Excuse me. China is starting to pull back recently from large-scale infrastructure projects in Africa, and securing private sector financing is proving to be more difficult today than it ever was. As capital flees for safety in these times of crisis, and African governments find themselves in debt distress, it is very likely that the terms they may put on the table for investors to take part could be much more attractive. They will set up a pipeline of PPP projects. There could be a pipeline of PPP projects that are coming up. The NTU SPF Center for African Studies recently organized a virtual webinar with the African Development Bank where they showcased what's on offer. The SCE could think of setting up a project development company for this purpose, supported by GLCs and local banks, partner with the AFDB, and pitch for such projects at the upcoming Africa Investment Forum in November. We would be happy to facilitate that. So foreign direct investments fell sharply in 2020, no thanks to the pandemic. But this is only half the story. Investments in sectors outside the traditional extractive industries is creating more sustainable growth. Take a look at these figures. It clearly shows that the services sector remains the focus of attention for many investors. That broadly covers business, telecoms, media, technology, financial services, consumer, and retail. South Africa, Nigeria, and Morocco are in the lead when it comes to the foreign direct investments. South Africa is less reliant on natural resources, much more driven by services sector. Morocco's stable economic growth, stable economic environment, and world-class special economic zones, skilled labor force makes it a preferential and as a preferential market to Europe, attracts investments into the automotive and textile sector. And Nigeria remains a target for oil and gas majors. These were the countries that came out as the top 10 most attractive markets in Africa, according to a survey conducted by Deloitte very recently. The feedback was gathered from almost 200 CEOs operating in over 500 African countries and representing a diverse set of sectors. When it comes to foreign direct investment, the West has traditionally dominated Africa, collectively contributing more than 2/3 of the FDI it receives. But the dominance is now being challenged by Asia. Between 2016 and 2020, 20% of Africa's FDI came from China, making it the single largest investor. Despite the recent pullback, China remains a key economic partner. The big surprise recently has been the UAE, which has quietly become the second most significant source of FDI in Africa. It's driven primarily by its focus on infrastructure such as ports. The Emirates' calculations, however, are more geostrategic than economic, and its investments are largely directed towards North Africa. This is the figure for China, and this is the figure for UAE. That brings me to Singapore. Traditionally, it is our agri-business sector that has been the one most exposed to Africa. After all, Singapore is a hub of commodity trading. But as concerns over food security and climate change impact take hold, the demand for sustainable agribusiness investment is likely to grow. As some of you probably know, agriculture constitutes 23% of Africa's GDP and employs more than 52% of its population. It is also the worst impacted by climate change. The rate at which the African population is growing means that in the next 30 years, it will have 620 million more mouths to feed. Big investments will be required for climate resilient and sustainable agriculture. The African agri-tech landscape is diverse and growing rapidly. There are now more than 280 ventures spread across the continent, most of whom have come in the last 8 years. Funding for agri-tech startups has grown from $50,000 in 2015 to more than 60 million today. And yet only 3% of that potential market size has been exploited so far. This is where I believe Singapore investors could pivot. The recent food price hike has sparked global interest in African agriculture. The opportunity to develop and commercialize African agricultural land has become a compelling case for foreign investors. But this has also sparked concerns about land grab. You may have heard repeatedly that Africa has large untapped agricultural land that could be that is arable but is not being used. In reality, it is not that as large as it is made out to be. There are no less than 420 large-scale land deals signed between 2000 and 2016. Very few of them actually materialize. So what are the new opportunities in African agriculture? Look at the priorities. For example, fertilizer production in Africa makes up only 3% of the demand. There is an urgent need to establish fertilizer plants. There's a pattern of rainfall loss right across Africa. It calls for new seed variety and sustainable agriculture practices. Opportunities in scientific farming is coming up. For a whopping 40% of farm output is lost due to poor storage. The day most of the African fruits are packed whole in planes and shipped. The day they get packaged in bottles and sealed containers on the farms on African soil would be the day when African commercial agriculture comes of age. Meanwhile, investors can look at the African Development Bank's Special Agro-Processing Zones, or SAPZ, where they can process fruits and vegetables for the local market. African agriculture supply chains are highly fragmented. Inputs and produce change hands repeatedly. That means that much of the value is captured along the way by intermediaries. Digital solutions could help reduce that gap and make the agro-commodity sector a lot more competitive. Financing Africa's fast-growing agri-tech firms also makes a compelling proposition. That brings me to talk about the technological revolution sweeping Africa. Africans have adopted e-banking and mobile banking faster than Asia. More than half the world's mobile money users are in Africa. I had the chance to visit Somaliland not that long ago. 70% of all the transactions made there were cashless. I never had to ever put my fingers on the local currency at all. Compare that with Singapore, where 60% of petty cash transactions, your coffee or other things, still happen in cash. More than 500 million Africans use mobile phones. 300 million access the internet through it. There will be 120 million new subscribers by 2025. With more than 40% of the region population under the age of 15 and young consumers will become digital natives. And there is no doubt that the smartphone will remain the primary source of growth for the foreseeable future. So ICT is going to be a promising sector to invest in for years to come. The fintech scene in Africa is booming. Startup funding in Africa has grown 6 times faster than the global average. It now boasts of 4 homegrown unicorns. The rise is driven mostly by mobile money. 2021 was a record year for African startups. They raised more than $4.3 billion, almost 3 times what they did the year before. Yet very little of this funding actually came out of Singapore. By 2030, the estimated funding gap for tech startups could be $90 billion. Considering that there exists such a vibrant community of VCs here, this is one sector that is crying out for attention. The average ticket size for the African startup funding is 1.5 million. Although startup activity is concentrated in these countries that you see on your screen, there are many others who have joined the race. E-commerce, there are only 2 African startups that have exited through an initial public offering, IPO, so far. E-commerce platform Jumia was the first, but it was listed in the New York Stock Exchange. Egyptian fintech, Fawry, was the only one that went public on the African soil. IPO and rights issues have also happened in Nigeria, Kenya, and Ghana. Safaricom was the largest listing in recent times. Dangote Flour Mills was oversubscribed 6 times. The concept of cross-listing is just beginning to catch on. A more developed stock markets like Johannesburg has fed Africa's emerging stock markets by allowing cross-listing. This is something that Singapore Exchange could consider replicating. The profile of the African capital markets has certainly improved in recent years, thanks to sustained high returns it has been giving to investors. Africa-focused funds have also come into play lately, but there are few and far between in Singapore thus far. So what will it take you, now that I've persuaded you to think of Africa as a market opportunity, here's what I believe it'll take you to succeed. First, spot the gap in the market. Investors that catch wind of what's coming up have much better odds of succeeding. 2, think cities, not countries. This is where most of the wealth is being generated, and this is where the demands for your goods and services is likely to come from. 3, diversify your risk. Do not put all your eggs in one basket. So if one blows up, the other one will cushion the blow. On average, firms with the widest footprint in Africa have the most sustained revenues. 3, be bold. Ride out the cycles of booms and busts. They're bound to happen. Singapore firms are often more cautious than Western firms and more risk averse than their Chinese counterparts. 4, find a reliable partner. And this is a tricky part. Find a reliable partner who understands the local landscape. Kellogg saw Africa as a key growth market, but needed local expertise, and it found Tolera. Wilmar knew how to run a successful palm oil operations, but it found a local partner, Sivka, in Côte d'Ivoire. And last but not the least, do well by doing good. Africa has huge development challenges. The state often does not have the capacity to solve it. If you see a problem, think how you can help. And I do not mean charity. Design your business model such that it delivers returns to your shareholders here and to your stakeholders there. Your commitment to improving people's lives will be a major driver of your success in Africa. With that, I thank you for your attention. Please do visit our website and follow what we do. Thank you so much.
Okay. Can we now invite Mr. Amit Jain to start the roundtable discussion with the panelists? Mr. Jain, please.
Thank you. I'm pleased to welcome our panelists here. Ranveer Chauhan, Chairman of the FYIstival-Africa Business Group. He's also the Chairman of our Board of Advisors. We have New Poling, who is the Executive Director for Africa, Russia, Latin America, and Pacific at the Singapore Cooperation Enterprise. And we have George Chan, who is the CEO of Pixis, a fintech company that enables cross-border financial transactions between Africa and Asia. And Sidna Omardia, a partner at Afri Advisory, an investment firm. So welcome all of you. I hope you can hear me clearly. Let me start by asking perhaps one of you, or to anyone who would like to take that first call, your very first impression of landing in Africa when you first went to do business there.
Amit, if it's okay with you, I will take that up. I wonder if I landed in Africa before polling, but let me try. So I landed in Lagos in 1993, and I was coming from India. Me and my wife, I thought we were very surprised and taken up. It had many smart aspects. So yes, the world has forever since then been trying to tell me how difficult Africa is. In my eyes, it was a lovely place. It has always been. The infrastructure was far better than what I had seen in India. I grew up in Kanpur in India. We didn't have the kind of highways that I got to see in Nigeria. We didn't have the kind of trucks, cars that I got to see in Nigeria. I'm not making an unfair case. Surely Nigeria had its challenges then, has now, and India has made serious progress in these 30 years. But my first impression of Nigeria were very good, very positive. Over to you.
Maybe I can then give the second response.
Please.
Well, Mr. Ranveer, you won hands down, because the first time when I visited Africa was maybe in year 1999. So you know how old I am. I went to Cape Verde together as a part of a government delegation of 2-person special envoy, and myself as the assistant to the special envoy of the foreign affairs to lobby for the UNSC seat for Singapore. And that was as part of government. And that was my very first visit to Africa. It was the first impression that I had was that the journey was way too long. You know, I felt like I almost died reaching Cape Verde. It took us like I think close to 24 hours to reach Africa. But when I stepped onto the soil of Cape Verde and interacted with the government officials and the people, it struck me that they are so warm and so real and very eager to show you what they have, and very eager to share with you whatever that they have, or even things that they do not have. So that was my first impression of Africa. But after that, then things took off from there. I fell in love with Africa, and I have never looked back since. I've not regretted that and I'm grateful that Africa has accepted me too. Thank you.
Okay, maybe I take the next round. Ranveer and Pauline, you beat me. You came to Africa much earlier than me. I still remember that the first time when I stepped foot into Africa, it was 2010. I must say that I was quite ignorant. I don't know much about Africa. Back then, guilty as charged. I thought Africa is South Africa. I shared a similar sentiment with Pauline. The flight is very long, and the time differences actually make the journey a lot more tiring. When I first stepped foot, it was quite different. I must say it was quite intimidating because it was very different from my upbringing environment. But as I started to engage with them, I realized that these people are very genuine. As Ranveer has shared, there are so many things that you can do in Africa. So from an opportunity perspective, there are almost all over the continent. But in order to capture it, it's not so straightforward. You need to spend time in Africa. And since 2010, I started coming to Africa. I moved to Africa about 10 years ago. So I never looked back, and I'm still in Kenya as we speak.
You know, there's a very interesting question here, and I you know, I would have wanted to put that towards the end, but because it really tugs at the heart of the matter here. Small enterprises, small and medium enterprises here in Singapore find it particularly challenging to do transactions or to do business there. There isn't the kind of support that big companies have when it comes to taking big deep pockets. They can take risk for a long time. And you heard in my presentation as well, being bold and take easier said than done. Ivan Lim is asking that with listed companies, they have bottomless pockets and deep, but what is it for the small and medium enterprises that they can do to mitigate some of the risks and difficulties that they have going into Africa?
Maybe I can start on this one, Amit. Given that I can't answer your first question, given that I was born in Africa, so I can't really tell you what was my first impression. So actually, I was in Africa way before all of you. So I guess you actually touched on the point. For those small and medium enterprise, the key thing is to find a reliable local partner. But I would add something else. It's not just about being reliable. It's about finding a local partner that also understands how you are willing to do business, how the Singaporean company is willing to do business. And when I talk, and what are their expectations? And I'm not just talking about financial expectation. I'm talking about expectations in terms of governance, expectation in terms of how we conduct business. So even if you have a local partner there and a reliable local partner that doesn't know how Singaporeans do business, it's going to be very complicated. So you need someone who knows how to do business in Africa, but as well who knows how Singaporean are willing to conduct business. I think that is the main point for those SMEs.
Another question here coming in from Kaba Bukwa is, I've noted that the biggest blockage to investing in Africa is largely in the minds of investors. When it comes to investment, some investors lack respect for the African market, reluctant to invest, and they're excited to extract profits, but not prepared to reinvest. I think that's what he's talking about. How do we shift those attitudes in Singapore investors and business development executives? Anyone can take this call.
Amit, I think what the center does is amazing work in raising awareness, doing the research, presenting the opportunities. Changing mindsets, the business needs change your mindset. You will not be able to grow if you do not build your balance sheet in the location where you're working. It is not, you'll remain a trader in case you think that you can operate and keep your balance sheet in Asia. Right? So I saw Olam growing over these 30 years. Olam started in Nigeria in 1989. And it is a very big company across Africa. I think it's present in 23, 24 countries today. Very significant. And do you think it is possible for them to not grow their balance sheet in Africa? So the business forces you. It will need you. Those days of, is it possible to do business in Africa without having a balance sheet? Yes, it is. You may raise your capital here. It's a different kind of risk. You have dollar capital and you have local currency operations. But that is a trading operation. SME, the question was there. I remember the time I mentioned I landed first in Nigeria, and there used to be a Taiwanese gentleman somewhere in the east of the country. And socially, when we met, we used to ask him, what's your business? He said, I bring yarn in big pools and put it onto small pools and sell it in the market. So it was a joke, but he found an opportunity as a SME in a simple business. Basically, he's saying, I bring material in bulk and I convert it into smaller packages for the local market. I do it locally. So he was doing value addition locally. I'll just leave that small example here. I have enough number of people around me doing business in Africa in small and in the SME sector and wanting to do business there. After leaving Olam, which is a multi-billion-dollar company now, I'm into corporate advisory and I tell MSMEs and large companies that capital is your risk. the more capital you have, you think that Africa is an easy market or a foreign market is an easy market, that is where your risk is. So SMEs are protected by the lack of capital they have. I will leave that thought for the audience.
Very insightful indeed, Ranveer. Pauline, you know, the Singapore Cooperation Enterprise is a unique body. It goes in countries which are emerging and showcases Singapore's experience and expertise. Could you tell us about some of the work, some of the projects that you have been able to oversee, and what were those real life obstacles that you were able to overcome, you know, in Africa particularly? Some anecdotes.
Thank you, Mr. Amit. Okay, just to put into perspective, SCE operates in the environment of government-to-government business, and also perhaps government to the business space. So the SCE clients are mostly the African governments who are interested to maybe adapt and implement relevant Singapore's development experience to their countries. So from the statement of requirement given to us, then SCE will partner with Singapore, maybe with the retired public servants, people who have worked in the ministries or the statutory boards, and all current public service officers. And combined with private sector expertise, we will go and deliver the services. So the private sector expertise will comprise of companies or individuals. And the main domains are in those where Africa has seen a lot of requirements are like the urban sector, the e-government sector, and the IT sector. But of course, it has not been an easy journey, but it did take us about 2 to 3 years to break into the market in Africa. And we are very thankful to the government of Rwanda, who has given us our first break by requesting that we bring in urban planning experts from Singapore to assist with the master planning projects in Kigali and Rwanda. And through that project, we've brought in companies like Sabana Jurong, who has started then their Africa foray through that project. And after that, they have moved on their own, and they are in various parts of Africa. So they say if there's projects like IT related or e-government related, then we bring in the technology companies. But it's not been, actually I would say that once you have established your footprint and demonstrate your ability to carry out those work, and there will be recurring businesses coming from Africa. So to date, we have completed more than 8 or 10 projects in Rwanda, and we have expanded through to more than 20 countries and deliver about 40 over projects in various parts of Africa. But it's not, sorry, shall I stop there?
Yeah, I have a corollary question. How can private entrepreneurs take advantage of the foray that SCE is making? Can they ride on that kind of and you know, if at all, how does SCE underwrite the risks that small and medium enterprises and entrepreneurs who would love to execute some of those projects, how do you help them?
Yeah. Okay. We do underwrite some of the risks. We provide an umbrella to cover some of the contractual risks, and when dealing with governments in Africa, because we are the main contractor to the foreign government, and then we subcon to the companies and the individual who are with us on the project. However, I would say that not all businesses would be able to find a role within the projects that we're involved with. But if you are a business who are providing services or product to government, and you have done so for Singapore government, or you have done so for Southeast Asia or other parts of the world, where you are providing some sort of product and services, and then there is the space where we could look to explore how then we could bring you on board on some of the projects that we have.
Let me turn to you, George. The fintech company that you have, makes cross-border financial transactions between Africa and Asia easier. I mean, a particular focus is on China. Could you tell us a little bit more about your work, at least illustrate that for our participants here?
Okay, thanks, Hamid. So my company Pixis started beginning of this year. Maybe I give you a little bit of context before I describe or give you the overview of what Pixis do. My context was previously, my experience was from cross-border trade facilitation. I was one of the beneficiary of SCE. SCE brought us to various different countries to help us, get into some of the government projects. So that was the context. And from there on, I realized one thing: when it comes to cross-border trade, what I was facilitating or trying to solve is from a compliance, from a customs perspective. In order to move any cargo, I realized the lifeline to cross-border trade is financing, liquidity, any financial services. And me and my co-founder started looking into this area, and we realized that not many people are looking into cross-border payment with Asia, particularly China. You have a lot of remittance company in Africa, there are a lot, but they are in the traditional industry, namely inbound. That means African diaspora remitting a portion of their salary back to Africa for family support. But not many people talking about payout, which is outbound. So what exactly is outbound payment here? If you look at the economy in Africa, Africa is generally a net importer of goods. So this is where the funds are going to, which is trade. And in Africa, all over Africa, the entire continent, if you look at the biggest trading partner, usually is China, right? That's because China is importing a lot of goods. Sorry, Africa is importing a lot of goods from China. And China is a very unique country because their currency is not freely traded. Not many people understand how settlement is done in China. So there's only two modes of payment in Africa when it comes to payment to China. One is bank. The second alternative way is actually the black market. Black market poses a huge problem from China context, which is unaccounted fund may cost you your bank account being frozen. To the extreme extent, some people get jailed. On the other end, if you use the bank, which is more costly and it takes a long time, and the amount of supporting document that you need to provide to the bank is a lot. And this is extremely unfriendly to the underserved or the unbanked community. And as you know, Africa continent, big chunk of the economy is from the informal sector. And these people are usually not using the banking service. And the only way that they can pay is actually through the black market. So where Pixis come in is, we realize there's a huge gap here. Just to throw some numbers here, is just Kenya alone, importation from China is about 4 billion. This is the official number. Unofficial number could be 2 to 3 times. And we are just talking about Kenya and China alone. So what we're trying to solve here is payment to China. So we can actually collect local currency, Kenya shillings, in any mode, be it mobile money, bank transfer, cash collections, and we can send the money straight into China with onshore CNY. That's what we are solving. And we already partner with UnionPay, Tencent, Alipay, and a few other less known entities. So that's in a nutshell what Pixis is doing at the moment.
But how do you then, if it's the informal economy that that you're addressing, how do you then screen that transaction, whether it's clean or not? What are your processes in it?
Good question. With the formal economy, we don't take on all transactions. We only look at transactions that have supporting document, namely, the proper trade, where you have containers coming in, you have tracking information. It's actually a proper transaction, not like gambling, social media, so on and so forth. So with this, with the proper supporting document, we can facilitate them. And this in itself is big. So we don't need to look around for others' transactions.
Right. Sadia, you have been based in Singapore for a while, and I would imagine you get asked a lot of questions and advice. People come to you on how to do business in Senegal, and you grew up in Senegal. Tell us from your experience, what are some of those difficulties, the common ones, and how do you advise them to overcome? We've already heard about finding the local partner. That's something that you addressed already.
Yeah. That's to me is the key point, really, finding a local partner. The key thing about finding a local partner, the following question is, how do we do that? How do we do that? If you ask me the same question 10 years ago, I would tell you it's extremely difficult, because obviously 10 years ago, the people who are doing business are the people coming at the generation from the colonization, like I would say the generation of my father and my mother. The key big thing is that there is a shift of generation. That generation obviously is coming to the end of their career, and there is a new generation that is kind of taking over the businesses, which is what I would say my generation. The difference between those two generations is that most of us mainly studied overseas and understand the standards, whether they are in Europe, in Asia, in the US. So that's the main difference. So which means that now finding local partners that kind of would be compliant to how Singapore does business is fairly easy, right? So that's the main. Obviously, one of the main challenge over there is kind of the bureaucracy, because it's not very fully digitalized. Everything is on paper, so things seems very slow compared to how things goes extremely fast here, right? So, and usually that's a frustration that you see from people who come over there to try to do business, because they don't understand what we call the local realities, where actually you have to kind of go at the pace of how we do business, not just in Senegal. In Ivory Coast, it's pretty much the same. And obviously, one of the key points, it's the elephant in the room, is governance. But again, that is completely changing because of this shift of generation. I would talk a lot about shift of generation because it's changed a lot. The landscape is completely changing right now. If you go right now, the CEO of the company is the old generation is leaving, the new generation, as I said, they know how business is done in the US, in France, in Asia, extra. So which means that the standard of governance is raising completely in Africa right now. And that kind of facilitates, it's easier to talk to Singapore. It's easy for me to talk to Singapore investors. For the generation of my fathers, there would be a gap, that because I know how people do business here. So I guess that the governance was what has been the main issue over there, but it's changing radically. I was in Dakar until last week, and to be honest with you, I was kind of surprised by when I discussed with people the level, the standards that they're raising, how the standards has raised now, and how just the language where people who do business use right now compared to others. Before it was just shaking hands and that's fine. Now it's all about the paperwork, making sure that things are following certain rules because they understand that that's how they're going to attract investors.
Well, one of the characteristics of many francophone countries is the use of the single currency CFA, which is, benchmarked to the euro and almost underwritten in some ways by France. So while it gives a certain degree of monetary stability, which is a great thing, it also adversely affects the competitiveness of an economy. Could you tease out some of the pros and cons of the CFA for our listeners here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the main pro is the monetary stability, as you just mentioned. I guess another pro that you could say is the better control of inflation, obviously. Those are the two main pros, in my opinion. But I think that the anchoring of the CFA to the euro no longer has the same meaning, nor does it serve the same interest as it did when it was established. Exports from the CFA zone to euro are fell from 50% to 25% in the last 20 years. Right, in favor of exports for countries like China, as you mentioned, Nigeria, India, Thailand. Thus, the benefits in terms of exchange rate stability with the euro area kind of very ineffective, because there is just less trades between the two areas. That's kind of, that's the first point. Second point is that if you look at export earnings, they're generally reported in dollars, right? Which the country of the CFA zone must convert then to euro, right? So generally an appreciation of the euro against the dollar reduce the value in terms of export earnings in the CFA member countries. So those two, in my opinion, are really the cons. So you have the stability, you have a better control, and I guess one thing as well, and if I can be a little bit controversial here, is the fact that being pegged to the euro in many African minds. It reminds them of the colonization. It's like the last of the wall that they need to break, So from an economic point of view, that doesn't really make sense. But in their minds, it's the last wall that they need to break. So there is a strong push for breaking the fact that the CFI is pegged to euro. But from an economic point of view, I think that the 2 points that I gave you are really the main, because we do transaction in dollars and we do less transaction with the European countries. It's just those are just facts.
Right. Thank you, Ranveer. Perhaps you could throw some light on what sort of reforms have countries like Egypt and Ghana and Ethiopia have done. You have seen the agri-sector change over the years, having spent so much time in West Africa, particularly. What sort of reforms have they undertaken to now become such big, major agri-commodity exporters?
I mean, it's a very key point, but perhaps the context sits about 30-35 years ago. One has to see over there. Operators like Olam came into the picture into a fast liberalizing market. The operators that were champions of the older system could not have continued in this new system. This new system was demanded by IMF, and otherwise the countries were going on with their assumption that the public sector can control production, can control trade, and they control the logistics assets. But over these 3 decades, I would say, liberalization has only helped. You look at when we went to Benin in Cotonou, the cashew production, it was hardly a crop that was known, but some 4,000 tons of cashew was produced. And a mere 15 years later, 50,000 tons was produced. Don't just look at the numbers. You look at what does each ton of cashew mean at a farmer and a family level. So from, let us say, 5,000 families making a living out of it, we had now 50,000 families making a living out of cashew. You should see the growth of cocoa in Ivory Coast, in Ghana. Ghana tried a big experiment with, those big silos, but it was good to see that the private enterprise And those ideas came in through. I really admire the kind of work that Omar is doing with his partners. There's an enthusiastic batch of investors and operators in Senegal. I'm very impressed with what George saw in East Africa, what he was doing on his own before. Then he was partnering a corporate and now on his own. There is so much to do in this continent. And the continent has still not written down all the rules that have been written in all other countries. So many of the conversations I have related to Africa, people will say, oh, but is it easy to go there? Is it easy to do business? I said, let me counterpose. In your assumption, it is easy to go to London. Why don't we all catch a flight? Let's go to London and do business there. I wouldn't even know what to do, where to start. I wouldn't even know whether I can afford that corner shop that Indians are so known for and can make a success out of it. But I do know there is opportunity in agriculture in Africa. There is opportunity in processing in Africa. There is opportunity in construction in Africa, infrastructure in Africa. We have a company here in Singapore by the name Nivesal. Saikat Chaudhary used to work for a large corporate, help them with their trading business in Africa. Then he saw an opportunity that actually you can help the African operators have their own assets, do their own processing, control their own logistics with their own means, without having to go to IFC for capital or come to Singapore banks. So there is an opportunity in this unstructured market, which, as you would have heard from George, and you keep hearing from Omar, and so many of Singapore Cooperation Enterprise clients, you need to have a passion for the market, willing to commit to some of your own education in that market. I don't mean it negatively at all. Many times education in a business sense is meant to be expensive. I don't mean it that way. SCE has got wonderful programs of taking you into the market. SBF takes mission trips. Any day, even today, after more than 30 years of working in Africa, I would sign up for a SBF mission trip when they take the Singapore businesses to Africa. I cannot achieve as much in 1 week on my own and through all my networks as I can achieve on an SBF mission trip. So these are some of the things happening. This is the nature of the market. I admire what Pixis is doing. When I was in Tanzania close to 30 years ago, George, I used to carry bags of cash. I was not an individual, not an entrepreneur by myself. For a corporate, the most efficient way of transporting money between two cities was carry cash.
So when I go for shopping, Ranveer, in supermarkets in Fair Price in Singapore, I find avocados from New Zealand, milk and yogurt from Australia, cheese from France, peaches from Turkey, coffee and chocolates from all over Europe. But the only thing that I find coming from Africa is the wine from South Africa. Why is it that despite having such a big community of commodity traders who know the kind of work produce that you have in Africa, we don't have that many produce on display in our supermarkets that are sourced from Africa?
Actually, the current times, this COVID time when Singapore decided to diversify its sources of, where all it gets its food from, I have been amazed. So I see mint from Kenya, I see avocado from Zimbabwe. I have seen, so I see a variety of fresh fruit products coming from Africa. But what we don't realize, that chocolate that you mentioned that comes from Europe, actually the cocoa that has gone into that chocolate comes from Africa. Africa is the biggest producer of cocoa in the world. Africa is today the biggest producer of cashew in the world. It may not be the biggest processor. The processors are Vietnam and India. But the biggest producer of cashew in the world is Africa. So there are enough products, but there is so much more that can be done. You're so right. We can learn from South Africa's example. We can learn from what Kenya is doing and able to send fresh mint to Singapore supermarkets. Right? I would like to see so much more of that.
You know, one of the things that South Africa has shown is that you capture a bigger portion of the value as you move up the value chain. I mean, they clearly have done that in the case of wine, going up against the traditional growers, right? And even here, their presence in Singapore. The constant refrain that has always been there is that somehow that has not been the case with most other African countries that have fabulous produce, but this climbing the value chain has been the big. Why is that so? Why has that been so?
A lot of the work continues to be in the commodity and the bulk space. I'm super impressed with the kind of corporates that have grown out of Africa. Olam grew out of Nigeria. It is a global behemoth today, but it grew out of Africa. Wilmar went into Africa, present in 14 countries. All these companies, there is Indorama. You spoke about fertilizer. Indorama has invested more than $4 billion in Nigeria, and it went there only less than 20 years ago. So it's a big producer in the fertilizer in the oleochemical space. Not in the oleochemical, the petrochemical space. There is a lot to do. There is enough cotton. A lot of cotton is simply shipped out to Asia and it is converted into products there. But I'm looking forward to the AFCFTA that you mentioned. It is a huge opportunity. What all of us have to realize is any developed and large economy, its biggest trade partners are its neighbors. African countries' smallest trade partners are its neighbors.
Yes, true. In fact, that brings me to George. How excited are you about the PAPSS, or PAPS as they call it, the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, which will allow local currency payments right across the continent? Huge advantage when it comes to inter-African trade, don't you think?
I have not worked with them, but the concept of connecting 54 countries intra-Africa, it is mind-boggling. It's not easy to connect even with the neighbor, let alone you have a different community like East, South, Central, and West. They are very different blocks of economy within one continent. So you have the Anglophone, Francophone, you have a bit of Portuguese, German here and there. So for us in the payment space, one of the biggest challenge is to do payout or even collections within Africa in the same continent. So with this, I'm actually looking forward because we are talking to companies like TikTok. There's a lot of influencers in the continent where they need to get paid. If this system go live, that would make things a lot easier for me.
I am aware that we are coming to the end of the program. So unless someone has some final words, panelists, otherwise I can hand this back to Wenying.
Amit, we will make full use of the time that you will give us. I would like to leave 2 small points here and give it back to my co-panelists. We don't have to always think of heavy-duty business. We can try light stuff. I have known my African friends who tried to bring in African art. So I believe there is a space for African art, African cultural products and services. There is a huge opportunity in data and research. I'm very sure at the center you will realize it's not easy to get data and material on Africa. And it is such an exciting space for students and universities to collaborate and work on. I would like to see 20 PhDs working on simply getting African data in place. We have space for that kind of research work there. All that can help. George has taken the lead, but really making the financial connections with the other markets. Not just the supply chains are connected, the financial markets are not connected. So I like what George is doing. I would like to see a lot of work. And if the Singapore banks cannot step up, I am really looking forward to the African banks coming up and setting up their rep offices here simply as a correspondence office.
Thank you, Ranveer. I have to answer this one question, and it's directed to me. This is about, again, perception. This gentleman, Jonathan Obaje, says that SVF and NTU are doing great jobs in improving the perception of the African continent. Yet the local media here is not terribly helpful when they have titles like "Shipment to Hungry Africa." Look, it'll take time. It's not easy. At the research center, our end, we try as best as possible to shift the frontiers and change that perception, but it'll take us time. So sorry for taking that. Wen-Ying, over to you.
Amit, we have to recognize Obaje for the work he does. He's from Nigeria, and he's producing pharmaceutical products here in Singapore. We find them on the shelf in our pharmacies here. So imagine the talent is there, the connections are there. We have to simply grow the bridge.
Over to you, Wen-Ying. Thank you, Ranveer. Thank you, panelists.
For the insightful discussion. I'm sure there's still many questions that our participants have for our panelists. So feel free to write in to me after the webinar. I'll send out an email to provide everyone with my contact. So ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of today's session. We hope that the webinar has provided you with useful information and inspired you to explore the markets of the African continent. There will be more festivals webinars, including for Africa, in the coming months. So if you're interested to join any of these webinars, you could scan the QR code provided on the slide to register, or can contact Global Connect at SBF for more information. So on behalf of our speakers and SBF, I would like to thank you, our audience, and our partners and supporting organizations for making this webinar a most delightful and successful event for us at SBF. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you at the next festival webinar on Africa.